The rain came down in sheets that night, hammering against the collapsed roof of the abandoned cottage like a judgment from the gods themselves. Evangeline pressed her back against the only dry corner of the hovel, her swollen belly tightening with another contraction, and tried to understand how everything had gone so terribly wrong. 3 days ago, Marcus had promised her they were almost to safety. 3 days ago, he had held her hand and sworn that the isolated cottage was only temporary, that help was coming, that everything would be fine. She had believed him because she loved him, and because believing felt easier than questioning the desperation she sometimes saw flickering in his eyes. Now she was alone. His things were gone. His scent had faded to almost nothing, as if he had been erasing himself from the space for days while she slept. The only proof he had ever existed was a crumpled note she found by the dead fire. "Forgive me. I had no choice. Do not look for me." Another contraction seized her body, stronger than before, and Evangeline bit down on her fist to keep from screaming. Her wolf should have been lending her strength, should have been rising to help her through this primal moment, but her wolf had been strangely silent for as long as she could remember, muted, distant, as if separated from her by a wall she could not see. She was going to die here. Her baby was going to die here, in this rotting cottage, abandoned by the man who had sworn to love her forever. The pendant against her chest burned with inexplicable warmth, and Evangeline clutched it through the rough fabric of her dress. It was the only thing she had from her birth parents, whoever they had been. The woman who raised her, the traveling healer who found her as an infant in the woods, had never been able to explain the silver pendant with its strange crest. It was simply hers, as mysterious as her own origins. The wind howled through gaps in the walls, and Evangeline tried to focus on breathing. In, out, through the pain, through the terror. She had survived abandonment before, hadn't she? When her adoptive mother died 3 years ago, leaving her alone in the world. She had rebuilt. She had found Marcus, found love, found the promise of a future. What a fool she had been. The contractions were coming faster now. She had helped her mother with enough births to recognize the signs, to know that she was running out of time. She needed to build the fire higher, find clean water, prepare something to wrap the baby in. She needed to move, to act, to be something other than a terrified woman sobbing in the dark. Evangeline forced herself to her feet and began gathering scraps of broken furniture. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the kindling. The fire caught eventually, sputtering and struggling but alive, casting dancing shadows on the decaying walls. She found a rain barrel outside, the water murky but better than nothing. She had nothing clean to wrap the baby in, nothing but Marcus's abandoned cloak, and the irony of that nearly broke her. She was arranging her meager supplies when the pounding came at the door. Evangeline froze. The cottage was isolated, miles from the nearest village. Who could possibly be out in this storm? The pounding came again, urgent and insistent. Then a voice, deep and commanding despite the muffling rain. "Is anyone in there?" I saw smoke from the forest path. A wolf. She could hear it in his voice, could sense it in the authority of his tone. Friend or enemy, she couldn't tell. But another contraction ripped through her, and she realized she didn't have the luxury of caution. "Help," she managed, her voice thin and reedy. "Please help me." The door crashed open. The man who stepped through was tall and broad-shouldered, rain streaming from dark hair that fell past his collar. His gray eyes caught the firelight and seemed to hold it, and even through her haze of pain, Evangeline noticed the scar that ran along his left jaw, the calloused hands of a working man, the worn but well-made clothes of someone who traveled far and often. He took in the scene instantly. His expression shifted from wariness to something softer, more urgent. In 3 strides he was beside her, shrugging off his soaked cloak and laying it over her trembling body. "I'm Ren," he said, his voice steady and calm in a way that cut through her panic. "A tradesman, caught in the storm. Can you tell me how long the pains have been coming?" "Since sunset," she whispered. "Maybe before. I don't know. I was sleeping, and when I woke up he was gone, and then it started getting worse, and I couldn't—" She trailed off as another contraction seized her. The stranger Ren knelt beside her, and his hand found hers without hesitation. His grip was firm and warm, an anchor in the chaos. "Breathe," he said. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. You're doing well." "How do you know? You're a tradesman." Something flickered in his eyes. "I've delivered foals and calves. The principle is much the same. We'll get through this together." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of pain and effort, and the stranger's steady presence. He built the fire higher, found cleaner water somewhere she couldn't track, tore his own shirt into strips for cloths. He talked her through each contraction, his deep voice a constant rhythm against the chaos of her body's demands, and he held her hand. Through the worst of it, when the pain made her scream despite herself, when she gripped his fingers hard enough to turn them white, he never flinched. He never looked away. He simply held on and talked her through it. Somewhere in those endless hours, Evangeline stopped thinking of him as a stranger. He was simply there, as steady as the heartbeat she could feel thrumming through their joined hands. She had never felt less alone in her life, which seemed impossible given that she was in an abandoned cottage with a man she'd known for mere hours. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured, his free hand brushing sweat-damp hair from her forehead. "Not much longer now. I can see her." Her? Just a feeling. Push now. Push hard. The baby came, just before dawn. Ren caught the slippery, struggling form of new life with hands that seemed to know exactly what to do. He cleared her airway, wrapped her in his ruined shirt, and placed her on Evangeline's chest with a tenderness that didn't match his warrior's build. "She's perfect," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. "You did beautifully." Evangeline looked down at her daughter. Copper hair, just like her own. Tiny fingers, impossibly small. A cry that announced her presence to the world despite the storm that had tried to claim them both. She had never seen anything so beautiful, had never felt anything like the fierce, overwhelming love that crashed over her like a wave. "What will you call her?" Ren asked. The dawn was breaking outside, golden light filtering through the rain clouds for the first time in days. After the darkness of the night, after the terror and abandonment and impossible struggle, here was light. Here was hope. "Hope," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." The stranger Ren smiled, and it transformed his stern face into something almost gentle. The scar along his jaw creased differently when he smiled, and Evangeline found herself memorizing the shape of it. A good name. A strong name. She'll need to be strong, this one. Born in a storm. First breath in a ruined cottage. She's already a survivor. "Like her mother," Evangeline said, the words surprising her even as they left her mouth. Ren's gray eyes met hers, and something passed between them that she couldn't name. "Yes, like her mother." Evangeline should have asked more questions. Who was he really? Why was a tradesman traveling alone through such dangerous territory? Why did his hands, calloused as they were, move with such precise confidence? But exhaustion claimed her before she could voice any of them, and she slept with her daughter warm against her heart, and the stranger keeping watch by the fire. When she woke, they were somewhere else entirely. The cottage that surrounded her now was warm and herb-scented, with dried plants hanging from the rafters and a fire crackling cheerfully in a proper hearth. She lay in a real bed with clean linens, and Hope slept peacefully in a handmade cradle beside her. "Ah, she wakes." The voice belonged to an elderly woman with steel-gray hair worn in a long braid and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. I'm Marin. This is my home. Your friend Ren carried you through the forest for miles to find proper shelter. Evangeline struggled to sit up, her body aching in ways she hadn't anticipated. Where is he? Sleeping in the barn. He's been checking on you morning and evening, but he wanted to give you space to recover. Marin handed her a cup of something warm and bitter. Drink this. It will help with the healing. Evangeline drank, her mind spinning with questions. A stranger had found her in her darkest moment, helped her bring new life into the world, and then carried her through miles of forest to find safety. And now he was sleeping in a barn, waiting for her to recover, as if he had nowhere more pressing to be. Why? She asked. Why would he do all that for a stranger? Marin's expression was unreadable. Perhaps you should ask him yourself. Over the days that followed, Evangeline tried to do exactly that. But Ren was a master of deflection, answering questions with questions, sharing just enough to seem open while revealing almost nothing concrete. He was a traveler. He had responsibilities he sometimes escaped. He knew what it was to lose family. He helped around the cottage without being asked, chopping wood and mending the fence and hunting small game for the pot. His hands were never idle, and Evangeline found herself watching him work more often than she cared to admit. There was an efficiency to his movements, a competence that spoke of someone accustomed to getting things done. "You've done this before," she observed one evening, watching him hold Hope with an ease that surprised her. He cradled the infant as if he had spent years learning exactly how to support a newborn's head, exactly how to sway to calm, fussy cries. His face clouded. "I had a sister. I held her daughter once. Before." He didn't finish. His jaw tightened around words he couldn't or wouldn't say. She didn't push. They were both people with wounds they weren't ready to share. Instead, they discovered small compatibilities. They both loved the hour before dawn, when the world held its breath between darkness and light. They both disliked pretense, though Evangeline was beginning to suspect that Ren carried more pretense than he admitted. They both carried grief they didn't know how to set down. She noticed things about him that didn't fit his story. The way he spoke suggested education beyond a simple tradesman, the breadth of his knowledge, whether discussing herbs with Marin or strategy over the fireside, hinted at training she couldn't identify. And there was an authority in his bearing, an unconscious expectation of being obeyed, that seemed at odds with his humble claims. When he argued with Marin about the best way to treat Evangeline's slow healing stitches, his tone carried the weight of someone accustomed to making decisions for others. When he stepped into a room, his eyes swept the space with the practiced awareness of someone who had learned to watch for threats. When he spoke of the kingdom's politics, which he did occasionally and carefully, his analysis was too sharp, too personal, for a man who supposedly had no stake in the outcome. "What happened here?" she asked one evening, reaching out to touch the scar along his jaw. Her fingers stopped just short of his skin, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. Ren didn't pull away. His hand rose to cover the mark reflexively. "A price for failing to protect someone I loved." "Your sister?" Pain flickered across his face. "She was young. Too young. There was an attack, and I wasn't fast enough. Wasn't good enough. The blade meant for me found her instead. I'm sorry. So am I. Every day." He lowered his hand and met her eyes. "It's why I couldn't walk past that cottage. When I heard you crying out, I thought of her. Of all the times I wasn't there when someone needed me, I couldn't fail again." The confession was not an answer, but it was more than he had given her before. Someone had died. Someone he blamed himself for. The scar was not just physical. A week passed. Evangeline grew stronger. Hope thrived on her mother's milk and the warmth of the healer's cottage. And whatever was growing between Evangeline and the mysterious stranger deepened without either of them quite naming it. He brought her wildflowers one morning, a small bouquet of late autumn blooms, and seemed almost embarrassed by the gesture. She found excuses to brush against him when they passed in the small cottage, and noticed that he found excuses too. They sat closer together by the fire each night, their conversations stretching longer, touching on deeper things. Neither of them spoke of what would happen when she was fully healed. Neither of them mentioned the outside world that waited beyond Marin's cottage walls. Then came the night when Evangeline woke from a nightmare, tears streaming silently down her face, and found Ren watching from beside the fire. He crossed to her without a word and sat beside her bed. His hand found hers in the darkness. "Why did he leave?" she whispered, finally giving voice to the question that haunted her. "I thought he loved me. I thought I knew him. We were going to be a family." Ren was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing slow circles on the back of her hand. Some people run from what they can't face. It's a kind of cowardice, but sometimes cowardice comes from impossible choices. Are you defending him? No. I'm saying that understanding isn't the same as forgiving. And you deserve answers you may never get. He paused, and his grip tightened slightly. What he did was unforgivable. Leaving you alone, pregnant, in a place like that. Whatever his reasons, there are no reasons good enough for that. She looked at him in the firelight, this stranger who had become something more. What about you? Will you disappear too? His hand tightened on hers. I will never leave without telling you why. That much I can promise. But you will leave. I have responsibilities I cannot escape forever. The admission seemed to cost him. But I find I am not ready. Not yet. The moment stretched between them. Something unspoken filled the space, not the supernatural pull of destiny, but something perhaps more rare, a choice forming, a connection built through fire and blood and shared darkness. Evangeline wanted to kiss him. She wanted to pull him closer and find out if his lips were as warm as his hands. She wanted things she had no business wanting from a stranger, from a man who had already admitted he would leave. Neither of them heard the hoofbeats approaching until it was too late. The morning brought destruction of a different kind. Evangeline woke to voices in the cottage's main room, one familiar and one strange. She rose carefully, leaving Hope sleeping, and stepped through the doorway to find Ren facing a massive man in armor, a man whose very presence seemed to shrink the small space. "Your Majesty," the armored stranger was saying, his face caught between relief and frustration. "The council has been frantic. You've been gone for nearly a fortnight without word." "Your Majesty." The words hit Evangeline like a physical blow. She must have made a sound because both men turned to face her. The stranger's eyes widened with recognition of her presence, and Ren, the tradesman, the kind stranger who had held her hand through labor, closed his eyes briefly as if absorbing a wound. "Leave us," he said quietly. But it was no longer a request. It was a command, delivered with the unmistakable authority of absolute power. The voice was the same, but the way he wielded it had transformed entirely. The armored man bowed and retreated. The door closed, and Evangeline was left staring at a stranger who was not a stranger, a tradesman who was not a tradesman, a man whose true identity she was only beginning to comprehend. "The Alpha King," she said flatly. "You're the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." "Reese," he said. "My name is Reese. Everything else I told you was true." "Was it? You said you were a tradesman?" "I said I was traveling. I said I had responsibilities I sometimes escape." He stepped toward her and she stepped back. Pain flickered across his face at the distance she created. "I should have told you. I didn't know how, and then I didn't want to." "Because you enjoyed pretending? Playing at being ordinary? Because you looked at me like I was just a man." His voice was rough, stripped of the careful control of moments before. "Do you know how long it's been since anyone looked at me without seeing the crown first? You saw Ren. You saw someone who could sit by your bedside and hold your hand without the weight of a kingdom making every moment political. I wanted to stay Ren a little longer. The confession should have softened her. Instead, it sharpened her anger. She had trusted him. She had allowed herself to feel things for him. And all along, he had been lying. Every word between us has been built on a lie. Not a lie, an omission. Everything that mattered was true. My sister died in my arms. I know grief. I know loneliness. The man who sat with you through labor, who held your hand through nightmares. That was me. The truest version of me. She wanted to believe him. Gods help her. She wanted to believe that the connection she had felt was real, that the man who had cradled her daughter so tenderly was genuine beneath the deception. But she had trusted Marcus too, and look where that had led her. Abandoned in a rotting cottage, nearly dying in childbirth because she had believed someone who said he loved her. I need time, she said. I need space to think. He nodded, though something in his expression suggested the acquiescence cost him. Take what you need, but there's something else you should know before you decide anything. Before he could explain, the armored man, Theron, returned. His expression was urgent now, troubled in a way that went beyond concern for a missing king. Sire, he said, the woman, look at her pendant. Evangeline's hand rose instinctively to the silver at her throat, the pendant that had always been part of her, so familiar, she sometimes forgot it was there. Rhys's eyes followed the movement, and something shifted in his expression. Where did you get that? Theron demanded. I've always had it. It was my birth mother's. I was found wearing it as an infant. Theron looked at Rhys with an expression that carried weight Evangeline didn't understand. Sire, that's a Moonshadow crest. The name meant nothing to her, but she saw Rhys go still. The Moonshadow line was exterminated 20 years ago. The pendant disagrees. Rhys crossed to her, moving slowly as if approaching a wild creature. He crouched before her, his gray eyes intense with something that looked almost like wonder. May I see it? She lifted the pendant from her neck and placed it in his palm. His fingers traced the worn silver, the crescent moon embracing a star that she had always assumed was merely decorative. This is authentic, he said quietly. I've seen drawings of this crest in the royal archives. This belonged to the Moonshadow royal family. They were allied with my grandfather, bound by blood oath. When they were slaughtered, we believed no one survived. I don't understand. Evangeline. He said her name carefully, reverently. If this pendant is real, and I believe it is, you may be the last heir to a murdered throne. The ground shifted beneath her feet for the second time that day. First, the stranger had revealed himself as a king. Now, her own identity was unraveling, revealing something vast and terrifying beneath the simple life she thought she knew. Marin spoke from the doorway, her voice heavy with old sorrow. I served the Moonshadow court once, long ago. The queen was with child when the attacks began. If that child survived... My wolf, Evangeline said suddenly. She's been dormant, silent. Ever since I can remember, she's been muted. I thought I was simply weak, born with a wolf too small to matter. Rhys turned the pendant in his hands, studying it with new understanding. Moonshadow wolves were known for their power. They were royalty among wolves, their bloodline touched by moon magic. If someone wanted to hide a surviving heir, suppressing her wolf would be essential. The pendant is warm, isn't it? Magic, working constantly to keep you hidden. Everything Evangeline thought she knew about herself was fracturing. Her quiet wolf was not weak, but imprisoned. Her ordinary life was not ordinary, but a disguise. And her abandonment. Marcus, she whispered. He knew. That's why he left. That's why he brought me to such an isolated place. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a pattern far more sinister than simple betrayal. That night, Evangeline could not sleep. She sat by the window of Marin's cottage, hope nestled in her arms, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. The pendant lay on the table beside her, its warmth somehow diminished now that she knew what it truly was. A cage. A beautiful, protective cage that had kept her hidden and safe and utterly ignorant of who she really was. She thought of the woman who had raised her, the traveling healer who had found her in the woods as an infant. Had she known? Had she looked at the silver pendant and recognized the crest, understood what it meant? Evangeline would never know. Her mother, the only mother she remembered, had died 3 years ago, taking her secrets with her. But Evangeline remembered things now, small moments that had always seemed strange but never quite significant. The way her mother had avoided cities, kept them moving from village to village. The times she had woken to find her mother watching the roads with worried eyes. The constant reminders to keep the pendant hidden, to never show it to anyone, to trust no one with the secret of where she came from. Perhaps her mother had not known the full truth, or perhaps she had known everything and chosen to protect Evangeline the only way she could. By keeping her ignorant, by suppressing even the questions that might have led to dangerous answers. The door creaked, and Rhys stepped onto the small porch. He had shed the mantle of kingship somewhere in the night, looking more like the traveler Wren than the sovereign who commanded armies. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "So should you." He settled into the chair beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, intimate and vast at once. "I remember the night they died," Rhys said eventually. "The Moonshadow Court. I was 12 years old. My father woke me in the middle of the night, told me that our allies had fallen. I didn't understand what that meant. I was too young to grasp the politics, the implications. I just knew that people were dead and my father was afraid for the first time I could remember." "Were they your family? The Moonshadow King and Queen?" "Allies. Friends, perhaps. My grandfather and the Moonshadow King had been close. There was talk once of marriages between our houses." He paused. "If you are who that pendant suggests, we might have been betrothed before either of us could walk." The thought was strange, vertiginous. In another life, she might have grown up in a palace, might have known from birth who she was and who she would become. She might have worn silk instead of homespun, studied politics instead of herb lore, been prepared for a future that made sense. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Not knowing sooner? We might have met under different circumstances." Rhys turned to look at her, his gray eyes silver in the starlight. "I would not trade the circumstances of our meeting for anything. A king meets many people. Wren, the traveler. The man who stumbled into that cottage in the storm. He found something he didn't know he was looking for." Hope stirred in Evangeline's arms, making the small sounds of infant dreams. Rhys reached out, his finger tracing the curve of the baby's cheek with infinite gentleness. "She has your hair," he said, "and your stubbornness, I suspect. You've known her for barely a week. Long enough to see it. She came into the world during a storm, refused to let circumstances defeat her. That's her mother's daughter." Something warm expanded in Evangeline's chest, something that had nothing to do with the pendant's magic. She had spent so long feeling alone, abandoned, lesser. And here was this man, this king, looking at her and her daughter as if they were the most precious things in the world. "Rhys. Yes? Thank you. For finding me. For staying." His hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if they had been doing it for years. "Thank you for letting me stay." They sat together until dawn, watching the stars fade and the sky lighten, two people suspended between past and future, between the identities they had worn and the ones they were beginning to discover. It took Theron 3 days to find Marcus and bring him back. The man who stumbled into the cottage was a shadow of the person Evangeline had loved. Thin, wild-eyed, clearly destroyed by guilt and terror. He fell to his knees the moment he saw her, words tumbling from his lips in desperate confession. 6 months ago, a man had approached him, Lord Aldrich Thorne, a noble from the Eastern courts. Aldrich knew what Evangeline was. He knew about the pendant, about her heritage, and he had given Marcus an impossible choice: bring her to an isolated location and leave her, or watch her die. He said he'd spare her if I just left. Marcus gasped, his eyes fixed on the floor. He said his quarrel wasn't with her, just with what she represented. I believed him. I didn't know what else to do. He had people everywhere. He knew everything about us, where we lived, where we went. I thought if I just did what he said, she would be safe. Reese's control was terrifying in its stillness. His hands did not shake. His voice did not waver. But Evangeline could see the rage banked behind his gray eyes like coals waiting to catch fire. And you never thought to tell anyone? Never thought to fight? He would have killed her. He said if I told anyone, if I tried to fight, he would make me watch her die. Marcus's voice broke. I thought I was saving her. By leaving her alone, pregnant, in an abandoned cottage in the middle of nowhere. By abandoning her when she needed you most. Evangeline heard her own voice as if from a great distance, cold and strange. Did you think Aldrich would simply leave me alone once you were gone? Marcus had no answer for that. He had been a coward and a fool, manipulated by a master manipulator, and now he would have to live with the consequences. But there was no time for recriminations. Marin shared what she knew of Aldrich Thorne, and Reese filled in the gaps. Aldrich had been advisor to the Moonshadow King, trusted above all others until the night he betrayed them to their enemies. The massacre had been blamed on rogue wolves, but suspicion had always lingered among those who knew the truth of that bloody night. He told me, Marcus whispered. He bragged about it, said he'd waited 20 years to finish what he started. Why? Evangeline demanded. Why murder an entire bloodline? It was Reese who answered. There's an old prophecy. When Moonshadow rises again, the betrayer falls. Thorne has lived in fear of it for 2 decades. He's hunted any rumor of survivors with obsessive thoroughness. If you're truly the heir, if hope carries the bloodline, you're his nightmare made flesh. Something stirred inside Evangeline, something that had been sleeping for far too long. Her wolf, awakening. Her heritage, demanding acknowledgement. She felt the creature inside her stretch and test the boundaries of its cage for the first time in her memory. Then we stop hiding, she said. He murdered my parents. He tried to murder me. He threatened my child. I am done being prey. Reese looked at her with something like wonder. Then we face him together. But Aldrich Thorne was not content to wait for them to come to him. The attack came 2 nights later without warning or mercy. Aldrich and a force of wolves loyal to him surrounded Marin's cottage, emerging from the darkness like shadows given teeth. The man himself appeared at the door, elegant and silver-haired, utterly without remorse. 20 years, he said, looking at Evangeline with cold blue eyes that held no humanity. 20 years I've hunted your ghost, and here you are, with a new pup to continue the curse. Marcus moved first, some desperate attempt at redemption, but Aldrich struck him down without effort. Not dead, but broken, crumpled against the wall like discarded refuse. The Moonshadow line ends tonight, Aldrich declared, as it should have ended 20 years ago. Reese stepped forward, placing himself between the enemy and the woman he had chosen. Aldrich Thorne, you stand accused of treason, murder, and conspiracy against the crown. Surrender and face the king's justice. Aldrich laughed, a cold and empty sound. The Winter King himself, protecting the last Moonshadow heir. How romantic. How futile. Do you think your crown matters here? I've spent 20 years preparing for this moment. Your guards are occupied with my wolves. Your captain fights for his life outside. And you are just one man between me and the end of a bloodline that should have died screaming 2 decades ago. The cottage became a cage. Through the walls came the sounds of battle. Theron fighting Aldrich's wolves, steel and fangs and desperate courage. Meryn had taken Hope to the back room, the only protection they could offer. And in the center, 3 figures faced each other in the firelight. You can't protect her, Aldrich hissed. No one can. The prophecy dies with her. Evangeline reached up and unclasped the pendant from her neck. The warmth that had been her constant companion since infancy faded instantly, and in its absence, something else surged to life. Her wolf. 20 years of suppression shattered like ice before a spring flood. Power flooded through her, vast and ancient and entirely her own. She had never felt anything like it, had never known that such strength existed inside her. It was as if she had been deaf all her life and suddenly could hear music, blind and suddenly could see color. Her wolf was not weak. Her wolf was magnificent. The prophecy, she said, and her voice was no longer quite human, says that I bring you low, not that anyone protects me. Her transformation was unlike anything the witnesses had seen. Silver-white fur erupted from her skin. Her body reshaped itself into something larger, more powerful than any ordinary wolf should be. When she opened her eyes, they burned gold, the color of her heritage finally revealed. This was what the Moonshadow bloodline truly meant. This was why Aldrich had feared her for 20 years. Aldrich's confidence shattered. He had expected a helpless victim, not a queen awakening to her birthright. Impossible, he gasped. The pendant should have destroyed your wolf entirely. Her voice resonated in his mind, in all their minds, the psychic speech of ancient royalty. My mother's magic was stronger than your treachery. As I am stronger than your fear. She protected me even as she died. She gave me a chance to survive. The battle was brutal, but brief. Aldrich shifted into his wolf form, dark and powerful, a creature that had terrorized the realm for decades, but he was facing 20 years of compressed strength and the righteous fury of a woman defending her child. Rhys fought beside her, his own wolf dark gray and formidable, and they moved together with unexpected harmony. Where she struck, he guarded. Where he pressed, she followed. They had never fought together before, had never even seen each other in wolf form, yet something in their movements aligned as if they had been doing this for years. But this vengeance was Evangeline's to claim. She drove Aldrich back, blow by blow, until finally she pinned him to the ground with her jaws at his throat, the betrayer, the murderer, finally helpless beneath the air he had tried to destroy. The killing blow hovered. Justice demanded it. 20 years of murder and manipulation, of fear and suffering, could be ended with a single snap of her teeth. She could feel his pulse beneath her fangs, could smell his terror. He deserved death. He deserved worse than death. But Evangeline hesitated. Death is too easy for you, she said. You will face trial. You will confess before the realm. And you will live long enough to see the Moonshadow line restored. Every day you draw breath will be a reminder that you failed, that the bloodline you tried to destroy will endure long after your name is forgotten. She released him. Theron, bloodied but victorious, bound him in chains of silver. Aldrich's wolves surrendered one by one, their alpha defeated, their cause lost. They knelt in the muddy yard outside Marin's cottage, a pathetic remnant of the force that had arrived with such certainty of victory. Some had been promised rewards, others had been threatened into service. All of them now faced the consequences of following a traitor. Marin emerged from the back room with Hope in her arms, the infant miraculously having slept through the entire battle. The old healer surveyed the destruction with the calm of someone who had seen worse, her sharp eyes taking in the shattered door, the overturned furniture, the blood staining her floors. "I'll need help with the cleaning," she said dryly, "and new shutters. And perhaps a larger fireplace, since apparently my cottage has become a center of political intrigue." The absurdity of the comment broke something loose in Evangeline's chest, and she laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria but was mostly relief. She had won. She had faced the nightmare of her heritage and emerged victorious. The man who had murdered her parents, who had haunted her existence without her even knowing it, now knelt in chains before her. Rhys moved to her side, his presence steadying. "You fought well," he said quietly. "Better than well. I've seen trained warriors who couldn't match what you did tonight. It wasn't training, it was instinct and anger." She looked at Aldrich, still bound in silver, his cold blue eyes fixed on her with hatred that had festered for 2 decades. "Mostly anger. Anger used wisely can be a powerful thing." She turned to face him, this king who had been a stranger, who had become so much more. In the aftermath of battle, with dirt and blood smeared across both their faces, all pretense stripped away, she saw him clearly for the first time. Not the Winter King, not Ren, the tradesman, just Rhys, a man who had chosen to stand beside her when he could have stayed safe. "What now?" she asked. "Now we rest. We heal. We plan." His hand rose to cup her face, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "And we figure out what comes next. Together." Dawn broke over the cottage, painting the destruction in soft gold. Evangeline shifted back to her human form, trembling with the aftermath of power she had never known she possessed. Her body felt different now, more alive, more present. Her wolf was no longer a distant whisper, but a full presence within her, settled and complete. Rhys stood beside her, also human again, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was bloodied and bruised from the fight, his fine tradesman's clothes ruined beyond repair, but he had never looked more real to her. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on what you want." He spoke carefully, the weight of kingship in every word. "You're the Moonshadow heir. You have claims to territories, to alliances, to power. The political implications alone could reshape the realm. I'm asking what you want, Rhys. Not the king. You." He was silent for a long moment. The mask of royalty slipped, and beneath it she saw the man who had held her hand through labor, who had cradled her daughter, who had chosen to stay when he could have walked away. "I want to know you," he said finally, "not as an ally or a political asset. The way Ren wanted to know you. The way a man knows a woman he cannot stop thinking about. Even knowing what I am? Especially knowing what you are." He stepped closer, close enough to touch. "You are extraordinary, Evangeline, not because of bloodlines or prophecies, because of who you became in that cottage, alone and terrified and still fighting. I've never met anyone like you." She reached up and touched the scar along his jaw, the mark of loss he had never fully explained. "And I never knew the Winter King was so warm underneath." "Only with you," he admitted. "Only ever with you." The kiss, when it came, was not explosive or supernatural. It was a choice, deliberate and meaningful. Two people who had seen each other at their worst and decided to move forward together. His lips were warm against hers, gentle at first and then more urgent. When they finally drew apart, Hope's cry echoed from within the cottage, calling them back to reality. But reality, for once, did not feel like a burden. A week later, they traveled toward Rhys's castle as a company forever changed. The king rode at the head, but he turned constantly to check on the woman beside him. Evangeline sat tall on her borrowed horse, Hope secure in a sling against her chest, the pendant that had suppressed her for so long now merely a keepsake of survival. Marcus had been sent into exile, his cowardice punished but his life spared. Evangeline had chosen mercy, though she owed him none. She hoped he would spend his remaining years becoming someone worthy of forgiveness. But that was his journey, not hers. Aldrich traveled in chains several horses behind, destined for public trial. The truth about the massacre would finally be known. Justice, delayed for 20 years, would at last be served. When they crested the final hill and Reese's castle came into view, massive and ancient against the winter sky, Evangeline felt a moment of vertigo. This was her future now. Not a quiet village, not an ordinary life, but the center of power in a realm that would soon learn what she was. "It's not too late to run," Reese said quietly, only half joking. She looked at the castle, at the man beside her, at the daughter sleeping peacefully against her heart. She thought of the abandoned cottage where she had nearly died, of the stranger who had held her hand through the worst night of her life, of all the identities that had unraveled and reformed in the weeks since. "I spent 20 years hiding from who I am," she said. "I'm done running. The council will have opinions about us. Let them. The realm will talk." "Good." She met his eyes, and in them she saw the man behind the crown, the one who had held her hand through darkness and chosen to stay. Let them talk about how the Winter King and the Moon Shadow Heir chose each other. Let them talk about hope, born in a storm and destined for peace. Let them talk. Reese reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, the same hand he had held through labor, through nightmare, through revelation and battle, and the slow, uncertain growth of something neither of them had expected to find. "Together, then," he said. "Together." She agreed. They rode toward the castle, toward the challenges and triumphs that awaited them. Two people who had found each other in darkness and chosen to walk into the light. Behind them, the forest slowly swallowed the path they had traveled. Ahead, the castle gates opened to receive them, and with them, a new chapter in the history of the realm. The Moon Shadow Heir had returned, and nothing would ever be the same again. But Evangeline looked at Reese, at hope, at the future stretching out before them, and found she was not afraid. She had survived abandonment. She had survived childbirth alone in a storm. She had survived the revelation of her true identity and defeated the man who had tried to destroy her bloodline. Whatever came next, she would face it as she had faced everything else, with courage, with determination, and no longer alone.